Hi, I'm Rob Dietz.
I'm Asher Miller.
And I'm Jason Bradford. Welcome to Crazy Town, where we give you 10-1 odds that Las Vegas will be a ghost town by the end of the century.
Today's topic is self-domestication and humanity's rise into a hyper-cooperative species. Evolutionary biologist, run amok. Get ready, folks.
Okay, guys, you guys are probably aware that my degree is in evolutionary biology. So I'm pretty excited about today's show and what we're going to talk about because I can talk about Charles Darwin.
Wow, your hero, your personal hero.
Did you know that my boys were born on the same day that Charles, not the same year.
Your two boys, Charles and Darwin, right?
No, I tried. I couldn't go that far.
Right.
But February,
Kristen was like not having it. Huh?
No, February 12th. Okay, so that was a big deal for me personally.
What was February 12th? I know it's their birthday, but what was...
Charles Darwin's birthday.
Oh, okay. They have the same birthday.
They have the same birthday. This is perfect. Okay, I've got the fecundity award at the annual Charles Darwin birthday party in graduate school.
Wow.
Because of this. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, I left my wife and kids at the hospital. I went to the party, and I got this award.
I thought you were making that up, but I now see that's a real thing that happened. You actually, the nerdy other PhD candidates actually presented you with a fecundity award.
I had twins.
Yeah.
You know, it was all me. Okay, I made her double. I made her double ovulate.
Wow, did you just claim like you did it all in the birth of children? Because that just doesn't play well with the mothers.
His wife doesn't listen to this podcast.
Shit. Okay, Melody, cut this part out maybe, all right? Let's talk about editing. Oh, anyhow, okay, let's move on. So Darwin had a book called The Variation of Animals and Plants Under Domestication, published in 1868. I know we've all read this. And it was... Okay. It was very influential for this doctor, this research scientist in the Soviet Union. And I apologize for all our Russian Crazy Town fans. Yeah. I am not sure I'm going to pronounce any names correctly going forward here, okay? Dmitry Belyev. And he had a very important assistant at the time, Ludmila Trut.
Wow.
And they were at
What about Nikolai Volkov? Was he involved?
I don't know. Let me keep reading.
Sorry, that's a wrestler from the old days of the WWF.
Okay.
3 of our listeners just got that and were like laughing.
Anyway, they worked at the Institute of Cytology and Genetics in Novosibirsk, Siberia, which apparently was this like place pretty high up in the Siberia, and they were somewhat isolated then from like Moscow and the political machinations going on.
Was that like a punishment to
be
banished to this lab?
Exactly.
Well, it was supposed to be this great city in Siberia where they were going to, they were going to do great things even up in that part of this, quote unquote wasteland.
Okay.
But anyhow, the problem that they had was that in the Soviet Union, there was really a backlash against Darwinism and genetics.
Unlike this country.
Right.
Yeah, we have no issues with that. Yeah.
Right. This is very ideological, not from a religious perspective, but they kind of, anyway, it's complicated. But what ended up happening was Stalin put in place this guy who was this uneducated peasant, and he ended up rising very high in the ranks of like the science, institutes of the Soviet Union. His name was Trofim Lysenko. And he almost just cut out the research of these people, which I will get into, which is very important.
Okay.
But it was saved by Rada Khrushchev, the daughter of the leader. Who,
I feel like you're going through some like Dr. Zhivago or Crime and Punishment, some like epic Russian story
it's
here.
An epic
all these
stories.
characters.
What I'm saying is that one of the greatest experiments in the history of evolutionary biology,
which you're about to tell us,
almost didn't happen because of bizarre stuff happening in the Soviet Union.
I bet you Nikolai Volkov stormed the ring and saved the day, right?
Yeah.
Is that what happened?
Yeah. So they kind of had to hide what they're doing, and so they were domesticating foxes.
Thank God they're way up there in Siberia.
Yeah, and they were domesticating foxes, and you can say, "Oh, we're making nice fur coats," and it was really a secret study of how domestication happens and what are the consequences. Because there's this thing called that Darwin described, all these traits of domesticated species, and it's called the domestication syndrome now.
Okay.
Domesticated animals are less aggressive. they're more affable and cooperative. They take juvenile kind of play characteristics and they maintain them into adulthood.
You tell that to the Rottweilers that attack me when I ride by on my bike.
Yes.
I think they missed that memo of domestication syndrome.
It's imperfect still. We're all working towards a better, they have better eye contact. And it's been measured now that there's real changes in key chemicals in the brain, like serotonin levels are higher in domesticates, oxytocin levels, cortisol is downregulated more. There is, less surges in testosterone in the males. And these alterations are not only on the chemistry in the brain, but there's these features of the organism and their morphology, which basically have taken juvenile characteristics of the body and sort of kept them into adulthood.
Okay, so these Russian scientists who almost didn't do it, took a bunch of foxes, and what do? They just bred them and found out there's all these traits that pop up?
All they did, they did the simplest thing. They had these foxes in these kind of cages, and they would approach, and they had hundreds of them, right? And they would approach, and the ones that were the tamest 10%, they let breed. Mm. And they did that for 6 generations. They got something that looked like a puppy dog.
Wow.
In 6 generations?
Yeah, that's 6 years. It's a generation a year. So in 6 years, they had a picture of this animal that had floppy ears, had a short snout,
right,
had sort of started getting mottled coating, so the color patterns started changing, and would curl up in your lap like a little dog.
Wow. So one thing that I didn't see in your notes, Jason, was there was another thing they figured out in this research, and that was they learned what does the fox say.
What are you talking? Okay, someone's good.
What the fox say?
Ring ding 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 ding.
That was probably the most important part of this study.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Jason doesn't get it.
I didn't even come across this.
You must have been out farming when the international band Elvis came out with the song "What Does the Fox Say." You've got some catching up to do.
Yeah. After the show, I'll play
You're
this.
reading too many scientific papers, and not enough YouTube.
Yes, but really key, and one of the other key ones that's important is concealed ovulation. Okay, and aseasonal reproduction. Really interesting stuff, okay? So I think about the rut, the traditional rut. You imagine these animals are crashing and chest bouncing and their testosterone levels are surging. But no, in the domesticates, it's no, it's just even keel. You can mate now, mate later. It's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So much less forcefulness and
much less
violence.
Aggression.
Much less aggression, yeah.
By the way, I hear our Pacific tree frog might be moving around back there.
He wants to be domesticated right now.
Yes.
Well, so you're talking about us intervening.
Yeah,
right?
artificially doing
Artificially domesticating. But that's not the only form of domestication that happens, right? I mean, we have, I guess, what people call self-domestication.
Well,
right?
I think that's an important distinction is that this was actually a test of how things were domesticated and what would happen. And you're right. I think that now we think that a lot of times it's sort of species domesticate themselves. And then maybe what kicks in is what's called artificial selection. So that after they're kind of grabbed a little bit, then we start focusing on these traits.
But when we talk about self-domestication, I mean, I think, at least for me, I always thought, okay, well, humans domesticated livestock, we domesticated dogs.
Right.
You're just describing that process of doing it with foxes. I always assumed that we had done that with dogs a long time ago. But I think from what I've read and the research that I think has been done looking back, that actually dogs kind of domesticated themselves.
Yes.
Right? And so from the predecessor of the wolf, it wasn't like we took wolf puppies away from their pack.
We didn't do the fox experiment.
No, we didn't do that. They were, there were some of these wolves who came close by. Maybe they were friendlier. They were less aggressive. They looked less aggressive. We left them alone. They were eating our garbage that we left on the outside of the tribal grounds or whatever. And over time, they had an advantage, right? An adaptive advantage because they had more calories and they were able to thrive, right?
Yeah.
So they did it to themselves.
Although much later we did it, right? Like those kennel club people who run dogs around and grab them by the genitals and whatever. Like those guys they're breeding dogs for specific traits.
If those wolves had known what would happen to them,
they would have
someday
stayed wolf.
I'm going to be a Chihuahua getting my balls felt in some weird
on camera.
Exactly.
No, that's the thing. So I think what we're getting at is that these animals made the initial step to come close to us, and then we said, okay, yeah, come on in. And now I'm going to select on the traits I really like, right? Like sitting in the lap. And
so that brings us to what we want to point out as the hidden driver of this episode, which is that we humans have gone through this process of self-domestication. We used to be a wild species. I don't know if we ever did the rut thing that you were talking about, Jason, but over time, we developed these traits of the domestication syndrome, and we did that through evolutionary forces, right?
Yeah, and I think also to think about it is there are wild species that have elements of the syndrome. So, for example, the bonobo chimpanzee is kind of considered almost a parallel of humans in the sense that, it got sort of tamer, it got friendlier. Mm-hmm. It didn't kick into the degree we did, but in essence, I wouldn't say there's a difference of like, oh, now we're not wild. No, we did this as a species out in the wild, right? Yeah. And so that's how but then we took other organisms and we quote unquote domesticated them and brought them into the fold of human society.
Right. But if we are self-domesticated species now, and we want to talk about that as something that's driven us into the sustainability crises and other problems that we see today, I think it's important to figure out or to explain what are the characteristics of that self-domestication in humans, and what does that mean for us? Like, who are we as a result of that?
Well, we're tamer, right, and behaviorally less aggressive, more affable, more cooperative, playfulness retained to in adulthood, more interested in communication in these eye contexts and physical changes. So the term that's often used in development is neoteny, which is the taking of juvenile traits and extending the period of development.
So basically, we never grew up.
Yeah, fits well for the three of us.
Yeah.
And
we are so advanced.
Yeah. So you extend the period of maturation. So it just takes longer and longer to go through the normal stages of maturation. And finally, your gonads mature, and you kind of look like a juvenile of a related species.
Too many inappropriate jokes right there. I'm just gonna shut up here for a bit.
I just have this picture of this kid in the basement of his parents' house. He's like 20 whatever. He's like, I'm just evolving here, okay? Come on.
Never grew up. Right.
So basically this friendliness and cooperativeness became our defining traits.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, it's interesting to think about that self-domestication had this profound impact on the course of not only our history but the history of the planet and other species. I mean, this seems to change over time, but now they're talking about how there are up to 9 closely related species, right? Homo species, right? We're Homo sapiens, and there are others that coexisted at the same time. We're the only ones left.
Yeah.
And to think that it was our friendliness, our self-domestication towards friendliness and maybe more cooperation and these other traits that we had that actually led to the downfall and out-competition against these other species that I think arguably they say may have been more intelligent than us, stronger than us. You would think in the abstract that we wouldn't have been the ones to have outlasted and outcompeted these other species.
Well, like for the Neanderthals, or Neanderthals, for example.
When did that happen, by the way?
About 8 years ago.
I like Neanderthal better.
It was on the birthday of
of Darwin.
Of Darwin.
They changed it.
They changed it.
Who's the decider in the official pronunciation of an extinct species of hominid? That's
the friendliest person.
It should be Jason after his Russian pronunciations at the top of this.
I am so sorry, comrades. Anyhow, where were we?
Well, I think we're talking about it sounds to me like friendliness as a superpower.
Oh, yeah, but and then so the Neanderthals, I was going to say, had larger brains. They were very well adapted to life in Europe and even Northern Europe. They had like bigger lung cages and stouter, and they were furrier, and like all these things. I could deal with cold better, and somehow, these little kind of juvenile looking runts show up and eventually kick their ass.
Yeah.
Right.
You know?
Right. I think we just gave them the puppy eyes and then we hit them upside the head with a stick or something.
Oh, gosh.
So I was never a fan of the show Survivor. I'm not a reality TV guy very much, but I do know that the motto of that show was outwit, outplay, outlast.
Right.
And it seems like that really is, I think, most people's notion of how one species outcompetes another. But what we're really saying is humans developed the superpower of friendliness, and ours became something more like out-cooperate, out-hug, out-trade, like kind of these very friendly, cooperative ways of advancing beyond these other competing humanoids, hominids, humanids.
And I think saying, hey, we're friendlier, so we outlasted and outcompeted. It was the fact that we developed these forms of communication. We had trade between groups. We were able to harness the creativity and the technology that was developed from other tribes or other groups through this cooperation and friendliness that we had that allowed us to have these material advantages over these other species.
Yeah, there was like there's a positive feedback loop between extending the time of development that allows the learning period. You know how there's the idea that there's these windows where you learn languages easier, and there's a time that it takes the brain to develop its sort of synapses and grooves, and then pruning and all this, that we have all this time in the human brain to develop. And so you just have this openness to new things and really a lot of creativity. And that sort of advanced culture and language so much. And then once you have that, you can coordinate like crazy and plan. And then, that's what it wasn't the physicality of us as individuals. It was this collective ability to plan and execute.
Okay, most people think of that as a hugely positive thing, right? Like it's a good thing that we can cooperate, that we can plan and do these wonderful works together, right? But it seems like there's got to be a downside there, doesn't there?
Well, that's what we're talking about now. I mean, that cooperation, that ability to harness all this technology and that creativity collectively has now led us to dominate the planet, and dominate it to the point where our own survival and the survival of all these other species is at risk.
Yeah, Jason, you turned me on to this quote here from a guy named Nick Longrich. Thankfully, he's not Russian. I can pronounce
that's
that.
an easy one.
Senior lecturer of paleontology and evolutionary biology at the University of Bath. You want to read that for us since you found it?
But cave paintings, carvings, and musical instruments hint at something far more dangerous. A sophisticated capacity for abstract thought and communication. The ability to cooperate, plan,
wow, this is so dramatic.
Strategize, manipulate, and deceive may have been our ultimate weapon.
Yeah, so it seems like that's the deal. So we do this self-domestication thing, and suddenly a couple 100,000 years later, we're dominating everything because we're so friendly.
Well, I do want to point out that it may have allowed us to dominate the planet, certainly dominate these other species, including other Homo species, but there was a lot of kind of intra-species fighting that's been going on, right, for a long time.
Can you prove that? Has a human ever raised a finger against another human?
Yeah, if you look at the history books,
I'm raising my finger against you guys right now.
History books are they're kind of boring. They're just filled with stories of everyone getting along, right?
Yeah.
No, I know. But if I have to listen to one more time that people sang Kumbaya around the campfire.
The Game of Thrones is just like one sickening, sappy scenario after another.
I know.
I just want to point out, yes, we talk about friendliness and cooperation, but there's been a lot of fighting as well within the species, and frankly, a lot of domination, particularly European domination of indigenous peoples all around the world. A huge consequence of that.
Well, then also within, the European history is like these borders, right, that kind of ebb and flow a little bit of these European nation states and these fiefdoms and all the castles you can go find, where they were just like protecting their territory.
So what is a fief exactly? And how does one who is a fief come to get a fiefdom?
Darn it. I wish I was better at knowing what I'm talking about. It's a great word.
Yeah, I know. Maybe,
it's a big one.
Maybe we can all aspire to become fiefs.
You're just a lord.
It's a self-domesticated lord.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or in Scotland, it'd be a laird.
Exactly.
So okay, that's fine. No one disputes that there's a lot of infighting that's happened, but you still can't dispute that through our cooperative tendencies, we've kind of colonized the whole planet.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of I've got an ant story for you.
Oh, like your aunt and uncle?
No. Like, wasn't there a Pixar film like that, or the ants?
The Pixar one was Bug's Life. There was one called Ants.
Okay.
That was, I think, DreamWorks.
Okay.
So I'm done with the pop culture
I was
crap.
just trying to give you a chance.
Nikolai
to share.
Volkov was in neither movie. Okay.
Okay.
But
And there was
Seinfeld was.
And there was a one. There was a.
No, that was B movie.
Oh crap!
What was the ant movie where there were giant ants? That was. Cool.
Oh, you're like going way back.
Way
like
back,
I
50s.
think Empire of the Ants, or I don't know. There were a bunch of
There
those.
were a bunch.
Yeah. Giant insects attacking civilization is always held in high regard.
It is, and that's impossible. But it is possible for ants to really take over. And so there's a fantastic, really interesting research. I guess this is great. I got to geek out on this again. Of the Argentine ant.
Evolutionary biologist run amok. Get ready, folks.
So the Argentine ant, actually, a lot of people are familiar with it, but not from its native habitat. It's from Argentina, is where the native range is. And it's got a modest range. And, an individual colony might occupy, say, the area of a backyard, a suburban backyard, normally.
Okay.
And what ends up happening is that the colony spread is sort of hampered by the fact that there's another colony, and it's got its own territory. It's kind of like defending its territory. So in the wild native state of the species of ant, they kind of keep each other in check. They spend energy sort of fighting these pitched battles along the territories.
So this is kind of like the fiefdom thing, like
Yes.
humans used to be.
Like humans used to be. It's sort of in the old days, the Earth can kind of tolerate humans spread out because we were kind of keeping each other in check, right?
Wow.
But here's the interesting take on this: is that the species has now been transported around the world.
The Argentine ants.
The Argentine ants have been spread, okay, and where they've gone to, they've taken over in just enormous ways. And people thought maybe it was a normal kind of invasive species story where, it somehow is really well adapted to this new environment and no one knows how to deal with it. But it turns out there's a special sauce to its success. It's that when they got transported and colonized a new area, there was no genetic variation. And so when each ant colony spreads and creates another colony, the colonies don't recognize each other as different. They function as one super colony.
Wow.
And so there's a super colony in like the West Coast California area that apparently has about 1 trillion individuals in it.
Trillion.
Yeah. And
I don't understand that number.
okay, just let's look at the national debt clock. Okay.
Money. Now I understand it. Okay.
Right,
yeah.
right. Money's easy.
Yeah.
Easy to understand. But apparently also there's the same phenomena as in Japan, in like the Mediterranean, and even the same genotype. So the same genotype that's in California apparently is also in Japan and Europe. So it's almost like there's this global super colony.
Except in Argentina. If they go back there, then the shit gets real.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's this idea that they were released essentially from the competition between their own kind. They became super cooperative, and then they just took over. They decimated other species. They're a problem invasive species, leading to the extinction and the takeover habitat. It's kind of like what we did, you know.
It's so interesting to think about that, because here we seem to have this celebration of global connectivity and a sharing of culture. And,
yes.
I think about some of these pundits that we have and thought leaders who talk about how this is the least violent we've ever been, paint sort of this rosy picture of cooperation globally. And those are all things that, yes, we want to see. We want to see reduced violence globally, fewer wars, more cooperation.
Yeah, the neoliberal promise.
But there's this dark side to it, right? Is if there are no limits there through that cooperation,
Yeah, it's infuriating. I don't know if you guys saw that book that came out this past year called 1 Billion Americans.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
gosh.
it's almost like a Argentine ants, like, let's keep it going. Let's expand even more. Let's keep this story.
Well, the analogy, like they call these super colonies of ants, and I know that we've heard the analogy for humans of calling we're the super organism.
Yeah, our friend Nate Higgins has talked about humans as a super organism.
As a super organism, this just machine just churning up the planet now because we've basically removed the limits on ourselves.
What you see happening is all through a collective action of the superorganism rather than the individual act.
Bizarre outcome of our friendliness.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's such a strange thing to consider. But I think, Jason, you're raising this really challenging question for us, because it's not like we want to be advocating for us to go to sort of follow that Argentine, ant model
in the native place.
Right.
Yeah, let's go back and relocalize and then beat the shit out of each other to control ourselves.
Because the last thing we want is cooperation and friendliness amongst people, right?
This is a conundrum.
Yeah, we're stuck between these things.
Right.
Well, so I think that's the question, right? Is like, okay, if we're going to relocalize either by some planned way of getting out of our overshoot predicament where there's too many of us consuming too much, if we're going to do that in a planned way or whether nature forces it on us, let's just say somewhere down the road we're relocalizing our communities into bioregions or whatever it is, nations that are smaller. How do we do that without sort of reigniting the violence and the Hatfield versus McCoy vibe that's been around in the Argentine ants and has been around in humans' history?
Right.
I'm not sure we can give a good answer to that question. I don't know that there is a good answer to that question. I mean, I think on some level, I think, well, hell, so we domesticated ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Now maybe the next step is that we moderate ourselves. Like, we have to figure out how to do that for ourselves in a way where we sort of embrace not only these natural limits and we return ourselves back to more grounded communities, place-based communities living within ecological limits, but done in a way where there is still this coordination and communication and cooperation amongst these communities,
right?
And that in the face of more scarcity, it takes us recognizing that what we actually have to do is to share and cooperate more.
Mm-hmm. Even with groups that are far flung from us,
right.
Which has always been hard for people to do until we've had all this international trade and all these intergovernmental agreements. We're having trouble, but we're trying a little bit. But how do we do that?
And it's a lot of surplus.
And a lot of surplus to do that. You can hop on planes, global communication systems, shipping containers going back and forth, interlocked financial systems. that's created superorganism that is killing us. But then, right, how do we retrench from that and maintain some sense of global community at the same time? Some sense of the other is not my enemy. The out-group is still part of my in-group in the larger sense.
Right.
That's the conundrum we're in.
Right. So the idea is somehow to supercharge the self-moderation
I think we need to get
characteristic.
that Soviet guy to kind of do that with us.
Come back, and he's dead. The woman is still working there, or at least she was a couple
Well, let's
years
get
ago.
her to do it.
Yeah.
Let's take a group of us, go up to Siberia, you know, figure out how to get this kind of population to self-moderate.
I'm there as long as I get to meet Nikolai Volkov.
It's a deal. Stay tuned for our George Costanza Memorial Do the Opposite segment, where we discuss things we could do to get the hell out of Crazy Town.
Okay, Jason and Asher, I've got another awesome review to share from one of our listeners here in Crazy Town.
My bruised ego lives for this moment.
I need a little pick-me-up, too.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like fan mail.
This one comes to us from Irritating 1000.
That sounds
Okay.
great.
Okay. Smart, sarcastic, funny. Want to laugh and cry at the same time. Have learned a lot, and even better, have been moved to get off my butt and get actively involved.
Nice. But actively involved by irritating people? Is that the...
Well, I don't know what kind
Everyone
of active
plays their
involvement.
part.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Maybe we need some irritants in the system out there. Seriously, thank you for that very kind review. It really does make us feel good, and we hope it influences everyone else out there to go and rate and review us, and maybe we'll get to yours on the air.
Every decision I've ever made in my entire life has been wrong. My life is the complete opposite of everything I want it to be.
If every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right.
Okay, here in the self-domestication episode, we were trying to come up with a George Costanza appropriate do the opposite, and we're just struggling.
We failed.
Because this, we pointed out the conundrum, and we just don't have an answer to that. That's why it's a conundrum. It's not like a crossword puzzle here. It's a conundrum. So the best that we could do is, instead of a do the opposite, is more of a think the opposite. Yeah,
and I would say, so think the opposite, and that would be for people who have been living with this sort of vision of progress in their mind. They read Steve Pinker, whatever. Cooperation's going to continue. Borders are going to be opened. There are no limits to our cooperation.
We'll be mining asteroids.
Right. Yeah. That think the opposite. Allow yourself to think the opposite. What happens if there's actually limits to doing that?
Right.
And try to envision, what does that mean? What are the implications of that? And then on the flip side, for people who maybe are more aware, like many of you probably are, that there are limits to our ability to continue to be on the path that we've been on, who can understandably fall into this sort of mindset that means we're going to be resorting to living in small communities, competing for resources. It's sort of a fortress mentality. Think the opposite and envision a possible future where that's not a viable path either.
Right. Where you're not fighting over the last can of beans with your overly testosterone-ed up neighbor.
Exactly.
So somewhere between The Road and Star Trek, there's got to be some middle way.
Yeah. And it happens to be here still on planet Earth.
Wow, I reread The Road, the Cormac McCarthy book recently. I don't know why. I found it in one of those neighborhood community libraries.
Yeah.
So there's some cooperation right
neighbor.
there.
Was there like tear precipitation all over the pages?
Right.
What neighbor would do that to some kid, 13-year-old kid walking by? Oh, here's a book.
Look, it's one who's not thinking the opposite the way you are. He's thinking it that pretty poor mentality. That's our show. Thanks for joining us in Crazy Town.
This is a program of Post Carbon Institute. Get more info at postcarbon.org.
Hey, with all this stuff that's going on, the craziness in the world, I'm really worried about reactive violence. This is something that was supposed to kind of be mostly winnowed out of us as we self-domesticated, but there's still little bits of it there, and it can pop up in times of stress.
Oh, it's picking up hugely. The other day, I asked my wife to pass the salt, and she punched me in the face.
Oh, exactly. Okay, there's stories like this all over the place now.
I punched you in the face just this morning.
I keep getting punched in the face. We got to solve this punch in the face problem.
It's one of those positive feedback loops. You get punched once. Everyone else wants to keep punching you.
We have to break the cycle of reactive violence.
It's such a punchable face. I got to do so. I got to like get some testosterone or something.
No. That goes the wrong direction. Oh. That's what's causing too much reaction.
Oh, right. Thanks for getting. So you got me back on track.
Yes,
so
please.
Here at Crazy Town, we're offering a new fundraiser. This is your chance to get in and buy something really useful. What we've done is we've sourced the best serotonin pills. We've packaged them up all nice, but we've labeled them as testosterone.
Oh, this is great.
Yeah, so you can give them to your agro neighbors, and they'll gobble them
man up. Here, take this.
Yeah,
man up, buddy.
Yeah. And meanwhile, they'll be just domesticating into a blissful friend.
They're going to eventually turn into a dog. You can rub their belly.
Yeah. They're going to be walking over saying, "Hey, do you need any eggs? Do you need any flour? Do you need any butter? You want to bake cookies?"
Oh, I'm so looking forward to not getting punched in the face anymore.
Yeah, we'll just eat chocolate chip cookies.
Ring, ding, ding, da, ding, da, ding, ding.
Crazy town, da, 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 crazy town.